Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Sit down. Come on. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that very, very, very kind welcome. Good afternoon, my fellow con-homers, friends, and others. And look, it's great to be here in Birmingham, where so many thoroughfares in the city are already named after our superb Conservative mayor, Andy Street. And I know that this conference is going to be a staggering success. I know this conference is going to be a staggering success because just in the last couple of days, about a dozen hard-left momentum activists have taken the trouble to ring my personal mobile phone and pledge their support. And of course, I passed them straight on to Brandon. I want to also to congratulate my friend Philip Hammond for predicting that I will never become Prime Minister. Yesterday I saw he said that, which is the first Treasury forecast in a long time, I think, to have a distinct ring of truth. And as my friend Paul, a former colleague Paul Goodman might confirm, I'm not naturally of a timid disposition. It is not my way to confide my innermost fears, but since this is only a fringe meeting and unlikely to be widely reported, I will reveal that I have one overriding anxiety about the current political scene, both domestic and international. And it isn't global warming or terrorism or Rouhani's Iran or Putin's Russia, real though those challenges are. It isn't the negotiating tactics of Jean-Claude Juncker, whether before or after lunch. It's not even the economic and political catastrophe that would befall us in the event of a Corbyn government, horrifying though I find that idea. My friends, the one thing I really worry about in this critical autumn of 2018 is that after 200 years, this oldest and most successful of all political parties should somehow lose confidence in its basic belief in freedom. And that after 1,000 years of independence, this country might really lose confidence in its democratic institutions, and that we should be so demoralized and so exhausted as to submit our institutions forever, indefinitely, to foreign rule. And if I have a function here today, it is to try, with all humility, to put some lead into the collective pencil, to stop what seems to me to be a ridiculous seeping away of our self-belief, and to invite you to feel a realistic and justified confidence in what we can do. Not in a spirit of jingo or glib partisanship, because I know that this is a time of trial. And it is precisely because our position is so serious and the decisions before us are so vital that it is more necessary than ever that we feel that quiet and legitimate confidence in our country, that we believe in basic conservative ideas and values, that we believe in our democracy. And quite frankly, that basic belief in conservatism ought to have been a little easier after the Labour Party conference of last week. And I don't know, you can't these days, in deference to you thrusting con-homers, I can't get away with too many references to the 1970s and 1980s. But surely, to goodness, we can take on this Tony Benn tribute act and wallop it for six. Not by imitating them, not by capering insincerely on Labour turf. We won't get anywhere by metaphorically acquiring beards and string vests or allotments. I've got nothing against beards. I hasten to say I tried to grow one over the summer. It's horrific. But by systematically pointing out the damage they would do. They would spend literally hundreds of billions renationalising British renationalising industries in this country. They want to clobber business with new taxes, with kind of workers' Soviets on the board. They would wreck the economy. They would drive away investment. And, it now emerges, they would consign the population to years of further tedium, rancor, and uncertainty, as if the last couple of years wasn't bad enough, by promising another Brexit referendum. Another one, as Brenda from Bristol might put it. We cannot, we must not, and we will not let this weaselly cabal of superannuated Marxists and Hugo Chavez admiring, anti-Semitism condoning Kremlin apologists anywhere near the government of this country. And that means instead of aping Corbyn, we have to take our basic conservative ideas and fit them to the problems of today. And it's true that the old conservative buzzword of choice has a different resonance these days. In some respects, we have more choice than you can shake a stick at. We can watch virtually anything we want, anytime, anywhere. Some of you, I see, are doing it already. We can zoom off to Airbnbs on cheapo flights. Our food is better, our cars are faster, our life expectancy is a lot longer. And yet there is one huge difference between a baby boomer like me and all you thrusting con-home millennials. And in one way in which opportunity has diminished. And that is in the scope of the younger generation with their own resources to buy somewhere they can live that they can call their own. And it's a disgraceful fact that we now have lower rates of owner occupation for the under 40s than in France or Germany. And that reflects the failure of governments for the last 30 years to build enough housing, but it is also a massive opportunity for us Tories. If we rise to the challenge, if we get it right, it is an open goal, because this is one of those critical issues where, in the phrase of Chris Patton, the facts of life do turn out to be conservative. And Labour's instincts actually clash in a fundamental way with the instincts of ordinary people. And worse still, Labour's political interests, which centre on the building and control of state-owned housing, are diametrically opposed to the interests of most families. And I remember when I first realised that we Tories were absolutely right about housing. I was a reporter on the Wolverhampton Express and Star, not far from here. And I went out to see a couple who complained about damp. They didn't normally do damp stories, but I was sent on that one. And it was a terrible scene. They were sitting there with the heating on full blast and a baby crying and condensation dripping down the window, and there were these great black spores all over the wall. And the chap was in his socks, in an armchair, in a state of despair. And he was worried about the baby's cough, which was getting worse. And the council wouldn't do anything. And he felt that he couldn't do anything because it wasn't his property. And I could see how he felt somehow unmanned by the situation. And I felt very sorry for them both, because they were both total prisoners of the system. And I thought what a difference it would make to that family if they'd been able to take back control, to coin a phrase, to buy that flat. And since then, I've lost count of the number of times, and I bet you have too, when I've been out campaigning and someone has told me on the doorstep that they would vote Conservative forever out of sheer gratitude to us, to Margaret Thatcher, for letting them buy their own home. And that... Thank you. And that is what people want. People want the pride of a place they own, a sense of excitement that's probably been common to humanity since the first couple took vacant possession of a mud hut in Mohenjo-Daro. And yet Labour hates that instinct, and Corbyn hates that instinct. Because although they themselves live in rather nice Islington townhouses, which they own, they would much rather that the electorate stayed in social rented accommodation. Passed by hereditary right, as incredibly these state-owned dwellings are, from one generation to the next. And they like it that way because they know that as soon as you get a mortgage and as soon as you have a stake in society, you are less likely to go on strike and you're more likely to vote Conservative. And if you stay in social rented accommodation, you're of course more likely to vote Labour. But I tell you something, my fellow con-homers, the paradox is that that Conservative approach not only delivers more homes for private purchase, but it delivers more affordable homes as well, more homes for all tenures. And if you look at the record, for instance, at the previous Mayor of London, something that my friend Philip Hammond might care to consult, you will see that not only did crime come down by 20% and the murder rate down by 50%, death by fire down 50%, road care size down by 50%, tube delays down by 30%, beautiful new bus, beautiful bikes, millions of trees planted, 2 new river crossings, Crossrail started, tube extended to Battersea, record investment, new museums in East London, and so on and so forth. And, by the way, NB Treasury council tax cut by 20%. He did ask that point. You will see that in those 8 years, we built more homes for all tenures than the previous Labour administration, precisely because we changed the constricting rules that stopped good developments going ahead. And you will see now how under #useless Khan, the number of new builds is slumping because Labour gets tangled in its cynical political objectives. And it is the Conservative approach that gets things done. So let's follow our Conservative instincts and give millions more young people the chance to become owner-occupiers. And let's encourage more small private builders, as my colleague Richard Bacon has long campaigned for. Let's take on the big 8 home builders, some of whom now are frankly abusing their dominant position. Let's crack down on land bankers and let's give councils a real incentive to go for planning permissions and to go for growth, and to encourage building on those brownfield sites with long overdue fiscal devolution. Give good councils the ability to retain stamp duty, council tax, business rates, and the annual tax on enveloped dwellings, and they will then have a motive to go for growth in their neighbourhoods. And of course, you need to make sure that councils didn't recklessly hike the business rate, and you could do that, and you need an equalisation formula because the yields are so different across the country. But we ought to be devolving that power, giving back control, because fiscal devolution is not only Tory in principle, it is a way to help councils that right now, I can tell you, are feeling the squeeze with the rising cost of services for the elderly, and it's also a way to build the homes our children and grandchildren are going to need. Now, when I champion the free market, as I do, you can see that I don't claim that it is perfect, and it is a disgrace that no banker went to jail for the crash of 2008. And I can see, normally I stick up for bankers as a rule, but someone should have gone to jail. I can see that the utilities have cunning ways of ripping off the consumer. But the occasional failure of markets, no matter how conspicuous, does not mean that state control is better. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't follow. I listened carefully to Jeremy Corbyn last week, and it was astonishing that he had absolutely nothing to say about the wealth-creating sector of the economy. The people who get up at the crack of dawn to get their shops ready, the grafters and the grifters, the innovators, the entrepreneurs. He didn't mention any successes. He didn't mention a single sector of the British economy. Nothing interested him, except insofar as he wants to nationalise 10% of every company of more than 250 employees. The only organisation whose output he singled out for praise was Preston Council. I'm sure they're a great bunch in Preston Council, but they are not the locomotive of the UK economy. And we Conservatives know it's only by a strong private sector that we can pay for superb public services. And that's the central symmetry of our one nation Toryism. It's only by making the streets safer. And by the way, don't you think it's time we brought back systematic stop and search to end the politically correct nonsense? End the politically correct nonsense that has endangered the lives of young people in our capital and elsewhere. It's only by putting in the infrastructure that enables people to live near their place of work. It's only by having a properly funded NHS to give people the peace of mind they need. And by the way, let's get that extra funding into the NHS now. It's only by making sure that young people have the skills and the training that they need that you can create, by that public investment, you can create the platform for businesses to grow and succeed. And that is how to solve the UK's productivity puzzle. It is that virtuous circle, that symmetry, that means we must on no account follow Corbyn and start to try to treat capitalism as a kind of boo word. We cannot lose our faith in competition and choice and markets, but we should restate the truth that there is simply no other system that is so miraculously successful in satisfying human wants and needs. And we should set our taxes at the optimum rate to stimulate investment and growth, and we should not be constantly aiming to increase, but rather to cut taxes. Mindful of the insight of the great 14th century sage of Tunisia, Ibn Khaldun, picked up later by Arthur Laffer, admittedly, that you can often cut taxes to increase yields. And we should have as our objective, as soon as possible, to cut taxes for those on low and modest incomes. And let's say now, as a Conservative Party, no new tax increases, because it is conservative to give people back control of their money. And instead of treating business as though it was somehow morally dubious, we Conservatives should celebrate its power to do good and the success of British business today. The only country in the world to have a trade surplus in music with America. Our manufacturing ingenuity, to my mind, gets daily more boggling. I think of the factory that makes bus stops, that it exports to Las Vegas. Bus stops, by the way, in a factory in Uxbridge, as it happens to be. And you wake up in Las Vegas, as I'm sure some of you have done, with a hangover, out in the street, and the chances are that you look up, there's a little piece of Uxbridge shielding you from the elements. And I think of that other Uxbridge factory that makes the futuristic wooden display cabinets for duty-free Toblerones in every airport in Saudi Arabia. Think of that, the invisible hand of the market reaching out from Saudi Arabia, circling the earth and pointing its finger at Uxbridge. And now is the time to turbocharge those exports, as Liam Fox has rightly said, and to be truly global again. Now, not long ago, I became the first foreign secretary to visit Peru for 52 years. And actually, I stood at some glittering embassy soiree in Lima. And I remember the famous old anecdote about one of my Labour predecessors, Lord George Brown, who had made a pass at a gorgeous creature clad in sinuous scarlet and so on and so forth, who turned out to be the Cardinal Archbishop of Lima. And I wondered why it had taken 52 years for a British Foreign Secretary to go again to Peru, an incredible place. It can't have been the indiscretions of Lord George Brown. It was 25 years since any of my predecessors went either to Chile or to Argentina. I tell you why, my friends. It was because our global strategy, our diplomatic, our political, our commercial strategy was focused on the EU. And of course, that was sensible in the 1970s. That certainly felt right in the 1970s when we first joined the common market. It makes much less sense today in the globalized economy when 95% of the world's growth is going to be outside the EU. And of course, the EU is and always will be colossally important to us. But the rest of the world is proportionally gaining ground. And I was thrilled to find that even though our trade with these Latin American countries is still relatively small, way behind our competitors, the UK is already the second biggest investor in Peru. We already drink the second largest quota of Argentinian Malbec. And following the success of the 2012 Olympics, which I forgot to mention earlier on, there are British consultants helping with the Pan American Games in Lima. And these are just the beginnings. Think what we could do if we had proper free trade deals. And that is why it is so sad and so desperately wrong that we are preparing to agree terms with Brussels that will make it much more difficult, if not impossible, to do such deals. And that's why it was such a mistake of us to leave on the Chequers terms, locked in the tractor beam of Brussels. We will not only be prevented by the Chequers deal from offering our tariff schedules. We will be unable to make our own laws, to vary our regulatory framework for goods, agri-foods, and much more besides. And that is politically humiliating for a £2 trillion economy. And it occurs to me that the authors of Chequers risk prosecution under the 14th century statute of praemunire, which says that no foreign court or government shall have jurisdiction in this country. It would mean... Look it up. Look it up. I thought you'd like that point. It would mean that UK business and industry, the entire economy, would be exposed perpetually to regulations that might have been expressly designed at the behest of foreign competitors to do them down. It would mean that whatever the EU came up with in future, banning the sale of eggs by the dozen, banning diabetics from driving, banning vaping, whatever, and all those have been at least considered by Brussels in the last few years. All this nonsense we would have to implement with no ability to change or resist. That is not pragmatic. That is not a compromise. It is dangerous and unstable, politically and economically. My fellow Conservatives, this is not democracy. That is not what we voted for. It is a constitutional outrage. It's not taking back control, it's forfeiting control. And by the way, they know it in Brussels. Don't be fooled by the suggestion that the EU will ultimately reject these proposals. Because what they want above all is to demonstrate to any other country that might dream of following suit that you cannot leave the EU without suffering adverse political and economic consequences. And what the Chequers proposals show is that the United Kingdom, for all its power and might and network of influences around the world, for all its venerable parliamentary history, was unable ultimately to take back control. And instead of reasserting our ability to make our laws, the UK will be effectively paraded in manacles down the Rue de la Loi like karatekas. And do not believe that we can somehow get it wrong now, bodge it now, and fix it later. get out properly in a year or two. That is a total fantasy. That is a total fantasy. The opposite will take place. I've been watching the EU professionally for 30 years, and every time a referendum goes against the federalist cause, I have seen how the centripetal forces lock on, and slowly, slowly the offending country is winched back into place. And by its manifest democratic injustice, Chequers provides the perfect logic and argument for those who want Britain to return to the EU, and is therefore a recipe for continued acrimony. If Chequers is agreed, I'm afraid it will only embolden those who are now calling for a second referendum. And these are the same people, incidentally, who explicitly, some of them distinguished former prime ministers and so on, who explicitly, I remember it, you all remember it, explicitly told the electorate in 2016 that if they voted Leave, there was no going back. Remember that? No second chances. That was it. We're leaving the customs union and the single market. They now say that no such thing was on the agenda, but that was what they said then. And they said that the people had to get it right in 2016 because they would never be asked again. And they are now cynically campaigning to do just that in a way that I think would be disastrous for trust in politics. People will see that they are simply being asked to vote again until they give the side that wants to stay in the EU the answer that it wants. And as Ruth Davidson has rightly pointed out, we cannot tell the Scots that they've made a decision to reject independence for a generation in their referendum, and then ask the UK population to vote again on the EU. The idea of a second vote is infamous, but the obvious democratic fragility of the Chequers proposals will only intensify such calls. And do not believe them, finally, when they say there is no other plan and no alternative. It's not my plan, it's not the IEA plan or the ERG plan. All these models, excellent though they are, and substantially the same. Super Canada deal, free trade deal, plus a deep and special partnership with our friends and partners in the EU. They're all derived from the Prime Minister's own vision at Lancaster House. And now, therefore, is the time truly to take back control and follow that vision, make the elegant, dignified, and grateful exit the country voted for. This is the moment. This is the moment to do that. And there is time. This is the moment to chuck Chequers. To scrap the Commission's constitutionally abominable Northern Ireland backstop, to use the otherwise redundant and miserable implementation period to the end of 2020 to negotiate the Super Canada FTA, Free Trade Agreement, to invest in all the customs procedures that we will need to ensure continued frictionless trade, and to prepare much more vigorously than hitherto for coming out on WTO terms. And if we get it right, then the opportunities, frankly, are immense. It's not just that we can then do proper free trade deals, proper full-fat free trade deals. In so many areas of the 21st century economy, this country is already light years ahead. Tech, data, biosciences, financial services, you name it. We're the leaders. And we can use our regulatory freedom to entrench and to intensify those advantages. And of course, our European friends and partners can see that that might be possible. And that's exactly why they want to constrain us. And yet I would argue that it's actually in their interests too, to have the 5th largest economy in the world on their doorstep, acting as a continuing brake and caution to the over-regulatory instincts that have held the EU back and held EU growth back for so long. Instead of being relentlessly homogenized, we can actually learn from each other again in the spirit of friendly emulation that inspired the renaissance of European civilization. If we get this right, it can be win-win for both sides of the channel. And if we get it wrong, my friends, if we get it wrong, if we bottle Brexit now, believe me, the people of this country will find it hard to forgive. If we get it wrong now and we proceed with this undemocratic solution, if you remain half in, half out, we will protract this toxic, tedious business that is frankly so off-putting to sensible middle-of-the-road people who want us to stop talking about Europe and get on with their domestic priorities, as we should be. And who currently feel that they have, because of the level of Brexcosis, that they have no home in any political party. It's true. If we cheat the electorate, and Chequers is a cheat, we will escalate that sense of mistrust. We will give credence to those who cry betrayal, and I'm afraid we will make it more likely that the ultimate beneficiary of Chequers will be the far right, in the form of UKIP, possibly others, and therefore the far left in the form of Jeremy Corbyn. Other way around, if you're me. Jeremy Corbyn, by the way, a man who takes money from Iranian TV, who can barely bring himself to condemn the Russian state for the Salisbury atrocity, and who indulges anti-Semitism, and who, by opportunistically now committing himself to a second referendum, reveals himself to be the patsy of the EU as well. We cannot allow that to happen. We must not allow it to happen. And so, for one last time, thank you all for coming along here today. And I hope you will join me in urging our friends in government to deliver what the people voted for. To back Theresa May in the best way possible by softly and quietly and sensibly supporting her original plan. And in so doing, to show confidence in conservatism and to show confidence in our country. Because if we get it wrong, we will be punished. But if we get it right, we can and will have a glorious future. And this government will be remembered for having done something brave and right and remarkable and in accordance with the wishes of the people. Thank you very much.